Welcome, Andy. Really good to see you, and appreciate you taking the time to talk about your teaching practice and your background, your influences, and where you think things might be going in the future as well. And we'll finish the podcast with some quick fire questions. But I do have one warm-up question for you to begin with, and that is, what's one thing bringing you joy right now?
What a lovely question. Maybe the simple answer to that is that I actually just finished my daily practice, which I do each morning. It sets me up for the day. It's been an essential part of my life since I began, right back in 1979, I think it probably was. And it started off very brief, just meditating on breath. But it's expanded quite considerably, and especially since I'm retired, it's much longer. But the main point I want to make is that it's the mainstay of my life. It's what nourishes me. It enables me to deal with all the challenges of being alive in this world at this time. And also, to be honest, right now, I'd say the challenges of getting old. I'm nearly 76. Whatever's happening, my practice is the priority of my life. And so that's quite an interesting question to start with, because it actually sort of launches into why I think practice is so important. It's the nutrition of the mind.
Oh, I like that phrasing. I've never heard it said like that before.
I've never said it like that before. It just came.
Well, that's an exclusive then, isn't it, on this podcast?
Yeah, this is the first.
Brilliant. So I'd love to hear about your background and your own journey into meditation. But before we go into that, it'd be really good to hear a bit about your what are you up to at the moment?
Well, it's quite wound down generally, I would say. I retired from paid work in 2007, went for a year of 2 longish solitary retreats, 5 months each, and then came back and devoted myself to what I'm going to call Dharma, which, is basically my Buddhist study, practice, meditation, and teaching. Perhaps as a result of the long retreats, I guess I'd gone through a transition. Things sort of took off so that during the period from around 2011 to 23, I was very, very busy. Teaching, leading retreats, traveling around the world, actually doing it as well. And then during the pandemic, sort of doing a lot online. And it included teaching an in-depth Buddhist philosophy course from 2018 to 2023, together with my wife, and I needed a break. So in 2022, I kind of announced to all the different groups I was connected with, I'm going to stop in a year's time. And so if you want to carry on as a group, you're going to need to make plans to manage without me. And I just stopped it all, and I had some transcripts of recordings of some talks I'd been giving online during the pandemic, which people had transcribed. And I decided to make those into what was going to be a book, but it ended up as 3 volumes. For a very select audience, people who practice a very particular Buddhist tantric practice. And I spent the best part of 2 years, 23 and 24, working on the books. And having withdrawn from teaching, I was, to be honest, one of the motives was I just wanted a break from, how to put it, I could say the burden of it in a way, because it is very demanding. But no, it was the role. Towards the end of 22, I think it was, which is in the lead up to this sort of sabbatical, I was leading a retreat, and one night I realized I'd been wearing the mask of a teacher, and it's not one I wanted to wear, and it's partly projected to me by the students, because that's one of the things that happens when you teach. And I realized I want to be free of this. I don't want it. So I actually announced this to the people on the retreat the following morning, and then from then on I tried not to be the teacher.
Mm.
which of course, you're still responsible. So you still have to take responsibility, but it's how you conceive of yourself that is the issue. And, as you will know, in Buddhism, we try not to grasp at self, but to actually abandon that. And here was this mask which had become a kind of self. So just mentioning all that to give some background to what happened when I stopped teaching was that I became free to be an ordinary person again. And that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
I got involved in a number of things outside the Buddhist fold, many of which I'm still involved in. And I found that very, very healthy for myself because it's a little bit of a kind of bubble, Well, like lots of things. So, but just to come to up till now, I think where you want me to get to. Towards the end of 24, I realized I was missing teaching. And I
Yeah.
started to think, maybe I could go back in a different way, in a freer way, in a way that isn't constrained by, dare I call it, the rules, or which are rules I'd set myself, basically. I mean, I'm not blaming anybody else for it.
Of course.
And so this year I have led a number of retreats, and yeah, they are very different from what I used to do. And I've led one course based here in my home where we have a meditation room. Yeah, I've got a different relationship with it now. So you're asking me, what am I doing these days with it? I guess I'm trying to free from dogma, is one way of putting it. I'm trying to free from that and allow things to flow. One of the things I really like is having conversation rather than preaching. I don't like to. Part of the problem of being the teacher is you have to be the expert. When I first started teaching, which was way back in 82, my teacher said to me, "Andy, I want you to teach." And I said to him, "I can't teach. I don't know anything." He said, "Yeah, I want you to teach." So then I thought, well, I don't know anything particularly. I mean, I was very early in my studies and learning how to practice and so forth. But then I thought, well, one thing I can do is facilitate discussions. So I started this group called Inner Experience. And a circle of people from outside would come in every week, sit in a circle, and I'd say, "Oh, here's a topic." And the topic might be love or death or stress or whatever the topic was. And I'd just say, the only rule is if somebody's speaking, you mustn't interrupt them. And then I'd say, let's just pause for a while, and when somebody's ready, start speaking. And my simple job was to hold the space. And that, in a way, informed everything since then. Even though, after a while, yes, I did get to know enough to be able to teach something. It's true. But I really don't like being the expert. Although, yeah, in some things, I acknowledge I do know quite a bit now.
Yeah. A big part of it is that holding space. And it depends how you conceptualize teaching. And you can be a non-expert and still teach.
Absolutely.
There's a fantastic book called The Ignorant Schoolmaster. I don't know if you've ever come, I can't remember the author,
No.
but the general idea within that is that this teacher within this story that was being told within this book didn't know anything about their subject, but they knew how to teach and help the learners to learn because they
Yes.
understood it wasn't about them. It was about facilitating and drawing out of the students in a kind of Platonic sense, really, in that Socratic dialogue sense, if you like, that it's in there within people already. And your job is just to help to bring birth to that, if you like. And so that resonates with me in many ways that actually you were skillfully holding space, I imagine. But then when you get the expertise, you are starting to maybe, I don't know how it felt for you, but I imagine that it just kind of flows naturally when it needs to come out, it comes out. And gradually you built that up
Yeah,
and strengthened that
that's
side of things.
true. Yeah. Going back to the discussion circle, the Inner Experience group, what blew my mind was how much wisdom came out of the mouths of people who hadn't studied or practiced Buddhism. And there I was in a Buddhist center, supposed to be teaching Buddhism according to my teacher. And actually the group was teaching itself. And it really showed me something which is a sort of foundation really for everything that I do in teaching. And of course, having been a drama teacher in my secular work, it was quite similar in some ways in that the role is to enable people creatively to bring up from within themselves, as you say. And of course, this fits very well with the whole Buddhist understanding, which is that all beings have Buddha nature. So the wisdom's already there. The only problem is it's buried. So you just have to sort of remove some layers and it will come out.
Yeah. And one of the central messages in Buddhism is to test these teachings out in your own experience as well. I don't know if you see this yourself as a teacher, is that you are, in a way, a catalyst or a guide. You're offering something, and then people can do with it what they will. Is that something that reflects your way?
Very much so. In my secular life, where I taught in FE, in the late 90s, we were offered the opportunity to do a work-based Masters in Education with the University of Exeter. And there were some brilliant teachers. What I learned on the Master's program was a vocabulary and a sort of methodology for explaining learning and teaching in a way that completely resonated with what I felt is right, what I feel is right. So basically, to put it very simply, we learnt about the transmission model of education, which is more didactic, and the constructivist model of education, which is facilitative. And the didactic one is based on the assumption that the teacher is the source of knowledge, whereas the constructivist model is based on the understanding that the student, the learner, is the source of knowledge, and the teacher's job is to provide information, guidance, and so forth to enable the learner to develop or construct the knowledge within their own mind. So it kind of says that learning is something that you construct yourself. And that fits with all my experience as a teacher. I think it's also very useful for people who want to lead meditation to understand your role in that relation. It's to enable the meditators to construct their own awareness, their own knowledge, their own understanding, to explore themselves. You are just there to help. One of the issues, of course, is that I'm in a Buddhist tradition that comes from Tibet, which is totally hierarchical, where the teacher sits on a throne and the students sit in rows underneath and passively look up and think, oh, wow, 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 isn't that person amazing? They're the source of all light and wisdom and everything that I need. And so we're almost talking about an inversion of the pedagogy of the very tradition that we've inherited. And that is quite a challenge for us in this particular phase of the lineage, which is how to adapt the pedagogy to the new environment. But it's perfectly doable. It's just that it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Right.
I think even if you teach in a secular format, you are, in a way, adapting all the time as well, and wrapping the teaching around the context and the nature of the people you meet and the conditions that are presented to you. And that doesn't mean somebody who has vast amounts of experience can't be a real role model for living in a more enlightened way or whatever.
Well, I think we need to reflect on humility and service. Humility doesn't mean self-abnegation, doesn't mean self-effacement, but it does mean having the deepest respect for the other and especially their potential. And then service is really, well, I'm here to serve you. Whereas, unfortunately, in certain situations, it looks like the students are there to serve the ego of the teacher. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
You do get this. For me, that's really yucky.
Yeah, I think it's the bubble you were talking about earlier. Giving this as a podcast about teaching is a really interesting point to reflect on as a teacher. How do you keep that check on yourself so you don't fall into that and have these unrealistic expectations that you keep trying to fulfill through developing some kind of persona or something?
Absolutely. And this is something that everybody has to deal with if they're going to maintain authenticity. Because otherwise, you are just going to become a creature of your own ego. It's particularly challenging in the tradition that I come from because, there's a tradition of students doing this towards teachers or even prostrating themselves on the ground, I mean, that is the tradition. And I do understand where it's coming from. But I think, unfortunately, it's also a basis for a kind of corruption, which is an institutionalization of a hierarchy, which then becomes sort of rigid. And obviously, when it is a very advanced spiritual being, like, I personally will prostrate to my own gurus, and such as the Dalai Lama or someone like that. And, it doesn't cause me any discomfort. But I haven't had anybody prostrate to me, but I have had people do this sort of thing. And then I started to feel a bit awkward because I thought, well, no, I'm just an ordinary person. They're projecting this onto me. But of course, this can happen in any situation where the teacher is respected. And so then the question is, well, the question for the students, how to show respect. But the question for the teacher is how to deal with receiving respect. One thing I often think is, let's say I'm leading a meditation group and somebody has an amazing experience. And then they come up to me after, or they look at me in such a way as to say, oh, wow, you gave me this incredible experience. So the way I deal with that is, and I often say this explicitly, I didn't give you an experience. I was a catalyst. I said something which triggered an experience. You gave yourself the experience. That came from within you. And I think that's a kind of very useful guide for any teacher of meditation or any of these kind of things. It's to recognize that everything that the student needs is within them already, but because of various confusions or lack of experience and so forth, they have got to uncover it. They've got to reveal it to themselves. So your job is to help them to do that. And if you think of your job as being like that, and you're their servant in that respect. You're doing a job for them, like somebody who goes to clean somebody's house.
Yeah.
They're
Mm-hmm.
doing a job for them.
Yeah. And that's that humility you were talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
You are presenting or creating the conditions that be conducive to moments of realization or whatever for people. You could say that in some ways it's nothing special. You're just doing what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think there is another aspect to it, which is to do with the relationship of your own practice to the teaching that you do. My personal teacher came to London. He was a Tibetan lama. He had come from Tibet into India, and then he came to London as a resident teacher in the 80s. He would go back to India every couple of years or so, and he had a meeting with the Dalai Lama, and he asked the Dalai Lama the question, have you got any advice for me about how to teach these Westerners? And the Dalai Lama just gave him one simple piece of advice. You practice yourself. And that advice was passed on to me. And it's absolutely brilliant. When your practice is still superficial, in a way you can just share intellectual understanding, which is basically the words. Even if it's correct, what you share, it's still somewhat superficial. It's basically the difference between head and heart. It's what we do in meditation is we bring our understanding from our head down to our heart, which is where it becomes intuitive. And the more that your own practice gives you an intuitive understanding of things, the more you're able to share that, let's say from the heart, not just from the head. Of course, you have to filter it so it makes sense and use the right words, so the head comes into play. We can also talk about left brain, right brain in this respect, I think. I find that quite a useful lens. But head and heart is the more common way of understanding this. The important thing is when you're leading a meditation, you yourself should be meditating at the time you're leading. And you should be meditating as deeply as possible. And I always recommend the people that I'm leading to meditate from their heart space, which is the area within their rib cage, as opposed to meditating from their brain. And so that means that when I'm leading, I also have to meditate from my heart space. And I think that way there can be some transmission or communication from heart to heart. And I think the students can pick that up.
Yeah, I think there is some science around this as well, isn't there? That when people are together in a room doing something in common, I can't remember exactly what it is, but their heartbeats start to beat in sync.
Right, yeah, that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, and I think some of the science suggests that the energy of the heart radiates out something like 5 feet. I don't know a lot about this, and I don't know if it's classed as pseudoscience to the scientific world,
Yeah.
but that would suggest some kind of connection that does occur. I've seen this as a musician in a band. You feel you're communicating intuitively with each other. You're not in the head at all. You're not in the intellect. You are very much embodied and connected.
And that's the level of spiritual sharing and community. And of course, people might go along to a mindfulness class not looking for anything spiritual. They might just want a bit of help with their stress reduction or whatever. But there is a spiritual aspect to it in that sense that it brings you deeper within yourself. It unlocks things, not always pleasant, but it does bring, it does help you to work on yourself, which is what we need to transform ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I love the way this conversation is going. I wonder if we could come back to some of this, maybe on a little bit more of a deeper level. But it'd be
Sure.
really interesting just to hear briefly a little bit about the origins of your own journey.
Oh, yeah.
If you would be happy to go back. I know you've mentioned a few of the more recent aspects of your experiences, but
Okay.
maybe back to the origins of what brought you to meditation.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it was towards the end of my 20s, and I was going through a double crisis in my life. I felt that everything was falling apart. I had a newborn child, but the marriage was actually falling apart. So that was very, very painful. The other thing was that in my 20s, I was a Marxist revolutionary activist with a group called the SWP, which is quite well known. And I used to sell their newspaper. And people always used to ridicule me and say, get back to Russia and stuff like that. And I always thought, oh, no, they don't know what they're talking about. And then one day I thought, oh, maybe they're right. Maybe I am a bit of a fool. Because I started in 72, and by 79, it was all further away than when I started. And I thought, maybe this isn't working. So that was a second crisis. I completely stopped doing that. I couldn't do it anymore, and I gradually withdrew. So I had this double crisis, and I was lost. And I was suffering as well, and I was finding it hard to handle ordinary life. And I tried various things and read a few things and blah, blah. But a friend said, why don't you try meditation? I was sort of in a space where I was willing to try anything, especially when it didn't cost money. So he taught me a very simple meditation, which was just sit upright on the floor on a cushion and stare at a point opposite you and just stare at it for 5 minutes. And he said, do that for 5 minutes every day, and after 2 weeks, you'll notice a difference. And I thought, well, that doesn't cost anything to do. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but it's an experiment I can try. And I did. And at the end of 2 weeks, I reviewed, and I realized I was slightly more detached from my problems than I had been. And that started me off. So I carried on. And then I thought I'd really like to learn a bit more about this, so maybe I need to go to a class. I lived in Harrogate at the time, and I looked on the library notice board, and there was a little notice saying Buddhist meditation. And it was the Leeds Buddhist group. And it meant going to Leeds, which was possible, once a week. And I did that. And they not only had a meditation section, which is what I was going for. I wasn't really going for Buddhism at all. But they also had a bit where somebody from a different Buddhist tradition each week would give a little talk. The guy used to give me lifts and he lent me books. And there was one of the Buddhist teachings called the Four Noble Truths, which is quite well known. The truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to that cessation. And I heard this one week, and then I was at home and I was really going through my own suffering, blah, blah. And I thought, why don't I just meditate on the Four Noble Truths applied to myself and see if it does anything? And I did that for half an hour. And at the end, I felt relieved. That was the beginning of my Buddhist journey. That really was what made me think this is worth going into. And just one thing led to another from there. But then from there, I got structured meditation guidance and my morning practice, which I kept doing all through that. But it started to become more structured. That at first I thought, oh, well, I'll get over my crises and then I'll move on, because that's how I'd lived my whole life. I'd sort of got into something and then after a while it didn't work anymore. I got bored or whatever and moved on.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't happen with this.
No.
So here I am, 45 years later, and I haven't quit.
Well done.
So it obviously worked. It was the right thing.
Yeah. No, that's obviously a deeper connection and probably with something that you had previously done that just kept you with it.
I would say so.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment or realization that you had? I know you just mentioned there the reflection on the Four Noble Truths, but were there any significant experiences that give you more insight into why this was working?
There was one meditation that I was taught in my first course, which was in the summer of 1980s. That's really what launched me, this course. Basically, the teacher said, this meditation can help you overcome depression. And I was always a bit of a depressive individual, which is something I inherited from my mother. And particularly with having been through all these problems. He said, do this meditation. And basically he said, do it for half an hour every day. And at a certain point, you'll feel a sense of joy. And that will be the indication that it's working. And the meditation was something that we call the precious human rebirth. And it's basically a way of appreciating how good it is to be alive in this human form with these circumstances that we have. And those circumstances include things like being able to do the practice, having the intelligence to do it, and being free from all the possible hindrances that would stop you doing that, and so forth. So it involves reflecting on all that. And it's done in a structured way, and it comes from it's a very traditional teaching. So I followed this in a very traditional way. Every morning, I started to feel better about being who I am. Started to feel better about being alive. So it was that kind of showed me that it's working. I could mention another experience I had, which is a long time later, in 2012. And this is a very hard one to explain. But in 2012, I was leading a retreat in California. And, leading retreats, I'm doing the practice too. So at a certain point, I suddenly had this sort of revelation, if you like, which was just this line went through my head. I've finally become who I am. And at the time, and probably still, I don't really know exactly what that means, but I know the feeling. And it was a feeling that, well, it went along with an awareness that up till then, in my whole life, and I was 62 when I had this experience, in my whole life, I'd always felt there was something wrong with me, which is, I can trace back sort of various sources for that feeling in terms of early traumas and so forth. Anyway, there's various explanations of why one might feel that. Maybe there is something wrong with you. Maybe you just don't know what it is yet. But the feeling was, that's lifted. Now I feel comfortable in my own skin. And I think that that is just a wonderful experience. It certainly was at the time. And even now, if I just reflect on it, I just feel great.
Amazing. It's very common, isn't it? I think that we don't realize the state we're in a lot of the time because it becomes such an everyday experience and an all-pervading experience that we think this is just it. This is the way our life is, and this is the way I am. But when you get those moments where something lifts and you get a clarity in whatever form that comes, it's like a realization that actually, my goodness, what I've been carrying for all of this time. It's such a weight.
Actually, hearing you say that has reminded me of an experience I had long before I got into meditation, which was at the age of 20, an LSD trip.
Mm-hmm.
And it was exactly the realization you just mentioned, which is that I had this realization, and I wrote it down during the trip so I could check it later. Everything I've ever thought was it, isn't it? It's as simple as that.
That's a good quote to have on your bedroom wall or something, or in the bathroom.
Yeah,
That you could read
exactly.
every
I think I
day.
probably did that.
Reminder. Yeah.
Everything I've ever thought was
Excellent.
it, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
And I think if you think philosophically what the implications of that are, because of what's called Cartesian dualism, which is the tendency to objectify everything, we make everything into an it. And especially when we are following a certain way of life, or we make ourselves into an it. We commodify ourselves, especially now with social media. That's part of the culture, isn't it? To make yourself a commodity. And of course, it's a lie, because that's not what we are. And that's part of the task of meditation, is to actually lift the veil and reveal what's underneath.
Yeah, and for that to be a sustained experience or leave its mark on you in quite a significant way, whereas psychedelics can give you momentary glimpses, but you may not be able to integrate that into your life in an organic, long-term way, which meditation, I think, probably allows in many more ways.
I think that's a very important point. And there's quite a lot of thinking these days about the relationship between psychedelics and meditation. And that's what people who are thinking about this are generally saying. And actually it takes me back to before I took this first LSD trip. A person who I respected a lot, who'd already done some, she said to me, don't think that LSD is the answer. It's a signpost. And I think it was a signpost, and a very useful one. And I'm glad to say I didn't really engage in it as much as some other people did. So I didn't really get sucked into it. But the whole point about meditation is, first of all, you generate the experience from within your own biology, chemistry, mind, and energy, and so forth. So you are completely steering the car, not a chemical doing it for you. But the other thing is this aspect of concentration, which is what the mindfulness teaching is all about, is how to hold an object without wavering. And that way your mind integrates with the object so that it becomes sustainable. And that way it can affect your approach to the world outside the meditation session.
Yeah. It's like the meditation is the workbench you work on, and whatever you can work on, whatever you can hold within meditation, whether it's a difficult emotion, you can take and translate that into your everyday life. You can sit with it. You can stand with it. You can be in a meeting and hold that feeling without getting reactive. Is that kind of thing that you're saying in terms of how it translates out into your
That's a
everyday
very
life?
interesting question as well. I'm a bit wary of the term switching something on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But having said that, we do need to remind ourselves, because everyday life sucks us so strongly that we forget whatever it was we learned on the cushion in the morning, or, and so forth. So in that sense, switching on in the sense of reminding ourselves, I agree with you. Having said that, the real transformation, which I think meditation is pointing towards, is one that actually pervades your whole life. Now, that's tricky because, especially when we have a very busy life, which almost everybody does these days, the world demands a lot. It's very greedy for our attention, our energy. It's almost like, it says in one of those old socialist songs, they transform your very lifeblood into gold. The world just really exploits every part of us, especially more and more with social media, where, I don't know, there's not so much room left. But meditation enables us to reclaim that territory, that inner world. And I think the results you get depend on how much work you put in, frankly. And how much work you put in depends on creating the circumstances to do that. And that's one of the challenges for a meditator, is to adjust their life so that there is room for their practice. And a lot of people have difficulty with that. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, actually, for so many people. And lots of people talk to me about that. I've been very fortunate. I told you about how I started out, and from the very beginning, I never missed a day.
Yeah.
Maybe if I was really, really sick, but I've barely been that sick that I had to miss a day.
You could call it commitment, perseverance. Yeah.
That's the whole point. At some point, you have to kind of take stock of all the things that your life demands of you. So somehow you've got to make a deal with life to give you room for some practice. And you've got to do that because your practice is so important to you. And then the question is, well, why is it so important? And then that's where you have to really look at the alternatives and decide for yourself, yeah, this is a very, very precious opportunity.
So much I would like to expand upon here, but so much of what you're saying reflects a lot of the way I think about meditation. But I would like to orientate the conversation towards the educational aspect a little bit more. So my next question is, who or what has been most influential on you as a teacher of meditation?
Okay, so in the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, or in all traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, actually, that I entered, the relationship with the teacher is of fundamental importance. And my main teacher, who I met in the spring of 81, and who passed away in 2015, who left this country in 92, I think it was, went back to India. And so therefore I had to see him occasionally in India. I almost feel like saying he taught me everything I know, but of course it's not completely true because I've had other teachers as well. I've had quite a number of really amazing teachers, but it was the relationship with him which was particularly special, I suppose. Incredible role model. We talked earlier about humility, for instance. He was totally humble. He was very jokey and, he'd just go to the park and chat to the drunks and invite them back for a cup of tea, or, this was in Finsbury Park in the 80s, which was, quite interesting, challenging area in North London. And people thought he was a really, really lovely guy. And, everybody thought he was really friendly. It was kind of only later when they heard from the Tibetans when he went back to India that he was such a high lama and everything. The people kind of realized how special he was. But he was special to me from early on, but not in the way of flashing lights. Special in something that's really, really hard to put into words. A very, very deep personal connection. Deeper than one's own mother and father. I was thinking about it yesterday morning, actually, how grateful I am for the certainty that my teachers held and hold about reality, about the truth, about the way to live, about what matters, about, what is important. As I said earlier, I was quite lost when I met all this, at the age of 29, 30. And so these people have been my guides. And this particular teacher, I'll name him Geshe Wangchen. It's 10 years since he passed away. I feel like he's still right here. At any moment, he's here with me. It was that kind of relationship. It's a relationship where I don't really feel there's a separation. In fact, I felt for a long time when he was alive as well that there was no separation. Even though he was in India, I was in England. It didn't really matter. I remember having one thought, I can't remember when, even if I never see him again in this life, it doesn't matter. So that kind of relationship.
Mm.
And everything that he shared came through his own study and practice. So therefore, in terms of a role model of how to be, that's how I wanted to be. Study, to understand, and then to practice, internalize, to bring about whatever degree of self-transformation I can before I leave this life. So it's kind of given my life a purpose, a meaning. So that's the answer, really.
Sounds very special. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how your experience with your teacher has influenced the actual practicalities of your teaching, how that manifests in your teaching in some way.
Right. So he would always be tuning in to the students when he was teaching. And that's one thing. And then sometimes he'd just stop and ask you a question. And it wasn't always to check whether you'd understood what he said. It might be to see what you think about that. So I think dialogical teaching, being in dialogue between the teacher and the student, I think he was actually my teacher of that. And that's something he would have done in the monastery before he actually came to the West as well, because that is something that happens within their tradition. Students go to a class, and quite often the teacher will be debating with the students to check and to help them learn. That's one thing. I mean, he was very loving to everybody. I think that's a very important point, which we haven't really touched on. I think the teacher needs to love the student in a certain way, which is without prejudice, without partisanship, and which simply means your whole purpose is what's best for them, that they feel good, that they discover what's good. So you're there to give that. And he was totally like that. Another very important point was he didn't have a big ego. He had quite a small student community. He could have had a much bigger one. He could have taught on big auditoriums probably, but he didn't. He didn't want to. I think that was quite a good lesson for me too, is that it's the quality. So that, if I'm teaching a class or leading a retreat or something and only a couple of people come, that's not a failure. The question is what sort of happens? What goes on? Is there something positive that happened? So things like that are very important.
Can we come back to the point about love? And there's this term unconditional positive regard. Is that a way of framing that?
I like that very much. Thank you. Unconditional positive regard. So the unconditional, because some of your students can be quite difficult. They can give you a hard time for whatever reason. And the unconditionality means that you don't let any conflicts that arise get in the way. And that means coming from your heart. It means, this is the whole thing about the heart connection, said earlier, is it's what's going on deep down, which is that there's a relationship. I mean, if they never come back, well, that means that they chose not to follow that relationship. That's fine. That's completely their choice. But if they're there, then you're responsible to hold them with that unconditional positive regard. Yeah. And the positive is obviously to see what's best in them. And again, I don't know if I mentioned it, but this thing about Buddha nature is very helpful. That everybody, down to the smallest ant, has the potential to be fully enlightened. That is quite an extraordinary kind of teaching, which is very hard to understand. So, it's not just a matter of saying those words. It's a matter of really working deeply to recognize the positive potential in everyone. But when you do, then unconditional positive regard it's not difficult, actually. It comes fairly easily. The fact that they've showed up for your class, that's great. That's really a privilege to you.
Certainly. Yeah, some lovely points you're making there. I wonder if you could say something more about that view that Buddha nature will potentially influence the way you see people, influence how you interact with them, that you have a trust that everybody has, that innate intelligence. So you're teaching from that space, from that place, which is very different to making judgment calls about people. You've worked in education, so have I, for a long time. And yeah, I don't know if you came across this a lot, but there's all this talk about who's intelligent and who isn't intelligent, who isn't bright and who's bright, and almost kind of a hierarchy of intelligence or that perception of in students. I've always trusted that innate Buddha nature, if you like. I might not call it Buddha nature, that everybody's intelligent.
Yeah.
And that changes the way you actually interact and relate, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is to come at each encounter with any other person or being for that matter, could be a dog, but let's keep with humans, to come with an open heart and an open mind. Now, that needs to be cultivated within yourself, and that's why meditation is very helpful, because you can cultivate that within your meditation practice. The idea is to cultivate it to such a strong level that whatever situation you're in, whether it's in the street or the supermarket or the family or society in general, there's that openness to the positive potential within the other person. And that flies against the general way, because, as you say, it's mainly based on external appearances and superficial judgments and criteria. And yeah, what you mentioned about the education system means it's not real education. It's just training for competition and individualism, unfortunately. And I think that's something which can be unlearned through meditation. And I think that's part of the role of the meditation teacher, is to enable people to unlearn, whether they were top of the class or bottom of the class, whether they were the big success or the big failure, to actually discover, no, I'm who I am, and who I am is okay. It's good enough, dear, as one of our teachers said. I guess, there's quite a lot of talk now, isn't there, about self-love and self-compassion. And I think that, there's quite an important role for those practices. And they can be learned through meditation too. And obviously, it's not to feed some kind of self-grandiosity or something, but it is definitely to just appreciate yourself.
This has come up before in a previous podcast. Some people may have not experienced that unconditional positive regard before in other contexts, and it's the first time. My goodness, don't feel judged here. I feel accepted for who I am. That's very powerful.
Yeah, and it's a big responsibility, which is to enable them to handle it and settle into it a bit. And again, without a lot of transference onto you as a teacher, as being the source and being okay. You're not the source. You might be a mirror that helps them to see that, but what they're seeing is within themselves.
Is there something worth saying around our role as a responsible person for people who are going through such transitions?
I think this is best dealt with on a one-to-one basis. And I think, therefore, it's not just a matter of sitting with the class once a week I think it's also important to be available for people to come and speak to you personally. Yeah, of course, people do come and they say, oh, I think I'm going to have to quit my job or leave my partner. I always try to help them to see that the actual transformation happens within the situation that you're in. That if you quit, you take yourself with you, and it's yourself that you have to change. But having said that, of course, it's not for me to say if maybe it really is the wrong relationship. Well, maybe they do need to break up. So I'm very wary of becoming a kind of counselor or therapist because I really don't think that's the same role. I'm not trained to do that. And yeah, it's just not something that I'm offering. So although I think it's important that people feel able to speak about any topic that they want with the teacher, especially, insofar as the meditation has impacted on the way that they see their lives, the really important thing is to make sure that they take responsibility themselves for what they're doing in their lives. And they think very, very carefully before making any big changes. Can't think of a better way to put it. But yeah, I do agree that the teacher has a responsibility. And I think it goes back to the whole thing about the love, the unconditional positive regard, is that, if you love somebody, then you want them to find the best outcome.
Yeah. Just want to touch on something you said about therapy. And I think sometimes people might perceive meditation practices as therapeutic. I think a lot of meditation teachers tend to see it as more transformational rather than a therapeutic relationship. Is there anything
Yeah.
more to say about that?
Well, my wife's a therapist, and she's very highly trained and professionalized, and she had to learn a lot from going on courses and just from her own experience. And that's very different from my background as a teacher. She's not trained as a teacher. I am. So, yeah, there are certain skills that I have, and they're different. And I think to understand the difference is very, very important when it gets into some of this personal territory with students. There's a lot we can learn from therapists as meditation leaders, but I think as you said, it's a very different kind of activity. I think we're teaching a method as much as anything. We're helping people to find a way to help themselves. Of course, a lot of therapies like that too. And in general, yes, mindfulness and meditation are therapeutic in the sense that they enabled you to feel better. But I guess because for me, meditation is a spiritual activity. That actually means that we're aiming for something what I would say would be deeper than therapy. But I'm not saying that all meditation leaders would necessarily see it as a spiritual activity. As you said, there's so-called secular mindfulness classes, and they have a very important positive role in the world. So, yeah, I'm very happy about the fact that those sort of courses and teachings exist. In my case, those aren't my purpose, although they might happen as a byproduct along the way for certain people.
Yeah. You mentioned when we briefly chatted before the start of the podcast that you do some work with your wife, and you thought you might maybe say something about that. Is there something you'd like to add about your
Well,
work?
we did a 5-year in-depth Buddhist philosophy program, and she would lead meditations at the end of each session, enabling people to integrate a lot of what they'd learnt during the class. So the tendency is for me to be the teacher and her to lead meditations, although I also lead some meditations. And she would often say she's not a teacher, but actually, in her own way, she is a teacher. And people really respect her. So we've done a lot of work together. We did this 5-year course, but also we've led retreats together and so forth. And actually, people really like there being a couple leading as well. It helps with some of the issues that you get around abuse and so forth, I think. But I think it helps people to feel comfortable. And we're used to working together, so we have a way of being that is fairly natural.
Yeah. Yeah. We're coming towards the latter part of this discussion. But I would just wonder if there's anything that we haven't mentioned around your teaching philosophy. Do you have any kind of dominant philosophies without being too attached to them, I guess, is one way of saying that.
There's not much for me to say because, as it's been clear all through, I'm coming from a very particular Buddhist tradition, which is very, very rich in philosophy and understanding about reality and in terms of developing the mind to be of maximum benefit to all beings and so forth. So that's my foundation. Recently, I've taken some interest in certain indigenous cultures, such as the North American and also the Andean shamanistic traditions. And I find quite a lot of resonance there. I'm quite interested in animism and things like that. But I'm not going to say that's a big influence on my philosophy, but it's something that we hadn't mentioned.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll just mention is, although I'm a Buddhist, I also attend a Christian meditation group. And I do think it's really, really important not to wall yourself off within a particular tradition. I mean, there is a benefit in working deeply within a tradition in order to develop your own mind, but at the same time, it's very, very positive to be open to other traditions, and there's always stuff we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
So I just mentioned that maybe.
No, I think it's a really good point. I think not to box yourself in, but understanding that actually following a particular path, it has a framework, it has a strong purpose, but also that stepping out helps you to shed new light on the teachings that you are receiving or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So looking ahead, are your hopes, if you have any hopes for the future of meditation, mindfulness, or the teaching of it, do you have a vision, or do you think there's a particular way in which it could evolve over the next few decades or whatever that would be more conducive to, say, your values and your vision for humanity?
Well, I think that the important thing for humanity to get through the next few decades is community. And meditation is a very powerful means for developing community. When one sits in a circle, or even it can happen online as well on a Zoom call, but especially when one is physically in a circle meditating with a group, this forms a wonderful basis. In the non-Buddhist world, it's often called a grounding, that kind of term is used, which is very good. To start a session off, a meeting, let's say, with a grounding, where we all connect with the earth beneath and, connect with each other, connect with life in general. And I do think that meditation has an incredible role to play in these coming decades, because traditional religions, in some ways, they're part of the problem. I mean, they are learning in their own ways to become more suitable for the times. But the thing about meditation is it's something that goes beyond the boundaries of institutionalized religion, and it's something that everybody can participate in. Well, I say everybody can. There are actually some people who can't meditate, or at least they can't sit still. But nevertheless, in general, there's a lot to be gained from it. And so, I'd hope that there will be an ongoing role in the coming decades for meditation teachers and leaders to contribute towards community building in general, because it's a very natural way of doing that.
Thank you. And just on the back of that, when you say community, I guess you're referring to the community between humans, but I also know from Buddhist practice and, even shamanic practice and animism that you are in community with the world, with nature or the
Thanks for
universe, if you
mentioning
want to
that.
get a little bit more cosmic. That is also your community.
Very much. And there's nothing better than to sit in a circle in nature and meditate, or even just on your own. It's very powerful. So you're absolutely right. And I think that with the rising awareness of the ecological challenge that we face, there's definitely benefit from a meditation practice that understands our interconnectedness with the whole web of life, and how precious that is, and how taking care of it is the only way that we're going to survive. And so for me, the only way that we're going to have a future as a human community, if you like, is by a transformation of our culture and our society and our relationship with nature and our relationship with each other as people. And I think that this can begin within oneself, but with that perspective that it's about connecting with what is beyond oneself. As you mentioned, the universe, but particularly the planet.
Yeah. So the next question would be, do you agree with the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears?
Oh, that's a lovely question. That seems to be a very common experience. So therefore, that's why people say that. I mean, the teacher might have appeared before. In my wife's case, the person who became her main teacher was somebody she'd kind of avoided a little bit, various reasons. But then, so he appeared, in other words, her teacher appeared before she was ready. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot in it, yes. It's a two-way process. Certainly from a Buddhist point of view, the Buddhas are always ready to help. It all depends on whether we're open or not. And I guess that if we're open, then somehow we will attract somebody to help us. And it might be our next door neighbor. That's another problem, is saying the teacher has to be something kind of unusual. One has to be a bit careful about that. You mentioned earlier about there's all kinds of different teachers, and your friends can be your teachers.
And those you might perceive as your enemies.
Definitely.
Well.
There's a lot to learn from them.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. 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 As long as you can handle the openness. Because there's also the thing that can happen, which is that meditation can lift off layers that we're not ready to lose, because they might have been our armor.
Yes.
And this is something as a meditation teacher, you have to also help students to navigate, which is they have to look after themselves. They have to protect themselves as well as being open to the world.
Yeah. If you were to give any guidance to someone who's considering becoming a meditation teacher, what would it be?
Yeah, it would be focus on your own practice and then really consider, why do I want to teach meditation? And really check, is it because I want to be somebody? Because you admired your meditation teacher and you want to be like them? And then be very cautious, because it's not about being somebody. It's about helping others. So really check your motivation. And then if you feel ready, well, just let it evolve. It could start by just teaching a friend to meditate. Like I was taught to meditate by a friend. That could be the starting point. Who knows? But certainly don't rush it.
Lovely. Where can people go to find out more about your work or any of the courses that you do?
If they put my name into YouTube as a search, they will come up with a number of recordings of things I've done, which are open to everybody. But there isn't a place where things that I'm going to do get advertised universally, I'm afraid.
No, that's fine. Are you publishing the book that you said you were writing? Is that going to happen at some point, or has it happened?
It's got its brakes on at the moment. I did a first draft of a book, and I got some feedback from friends, very helpful feedback. And as a result, I'm planning to rewrite it this year. And right now I'm reading a book, a very interesting book called Writing Down the Bones, which is to free up your writing. And I want to write in a very different style. So I'm going to give it another try. But there's a bit of me that's also prepared for it to just drop it. So we'll have to see.
Well, good luck.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's been super interesting. It's been great to talk to you. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for inviting me. And I've very much enjoyed talking with you as well. And hopefully anybody who watches this will get some benefit.
Thanks a lot.